Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. It's been a little while. It's been a good summer here in Asheville. Finished up some astrology classes and also finished up an Introduction to Kriya Yoga training online webinar. So I have some questions from participants who were in that course, things we weren't able to get to in the course itself, even though we did spend about 12 hours or so together, 2 hours a week. And that course is actually available now as a download through AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. It's an 11-hour course. And the point of that course was to give you a foundation in the proper practice of Kriya. Number one, in the specific techniques that you learn when you're initiated, the life force arousal technique, Kriya pranayama, Jyoti mudra. We went through all of those and practiced those together. But we also looked to the Yoga Sutras and various aspects of lifestyle support that help you make the most of your Kriya Yoga practice. And I find this to be important because there's usually two different camps within the Kriya Yoga traditions. And I say traditions because there are multiple lineages and multiple ideas about how things should go. And there are those who are staunch believers that the guru does it all for you, so you have to find the right guru. And then there are those that believe that it's all technique, that as long as you have the right technique, you're golden. And I have to admit, I found it somewhere in between, that technique is very helpful, that having a proper teacher, someone who can share, instruct you, both in technique as well as in lifestyle routines, all this is extremely helpful. But so anyway, we put this course together, this webinar, to cover all those bases. That way people can have a recording, consistent teaching they can go back to and relearn about Kriya Yoga practice. And we also included, in the class itself, there were 4 or 5 practice sessions aside from the class throughout the week where we get together online and meditate together, and I take participants through a guided meditation with Kriya practices where we reviewed how to apply Kriya techniques, including self-inquiry, alternate nostril breathing, different things to help you along the way. But anyway, that's neither here nor there at this point. Today we're going to be talking about specific questions that participants had after they've been practicing for a little while. There's about 8 of them here, so I'll do my best to get through them. Question number 1 deals with astrology and spiritual evolution. And this is a very good question because, number 1, I'm a Vedic astrologer as well as a Kriya Yoga teacher. And sometimes I get asked, such as this, is it possible to predict spiritual evolution within a person's horoscope? That's debatable. I think that within a person's horoscope you can see trends towards certain kinds of activities. You can see trends towards having a capacity to be able to sit still and meditate, to contemplate. You can see trends towards devotion, trends towards detachment, all things which are really helpful within spiritual progress and spiritual evolution. And then in Jaimini astrology, there are actually particular techniques that speak to this person will experience blissful realms after death, or this person will experience blissful union with the divine if there are certain planets aspecting different parts of the chart. But personally, while I like to look at that, I don't like to make a concrete judgment on that fact, because there are numerous people in the world who can transcend their karmic attachments. So you can look at someone's chart and think to yourself, gee, you'd think they'd be a little more awake than that, but they're not. Or you'd look at other people's chart and you'd say, that's amazing that they are as clear and aware and at peace within themselves as they are based on that chart. And so what I really found is that it doesn't matter so much the chart, although that gives you a good foundational understanding. What matters is what is an individual doing in the present. Meaning right now, if you're engaging your spiritual evolution as you know how, whether it's through meditation practice, mantra, learning to balance your emotional, psychological states, getting an understanding of what it means to know God, wherever you need to be personally, even making your body healthy, that's an important aspect of spiritual practice, because we need a healthy body, as healthy as we can get. Again, remembering that we all have different capacities in all of these areas. Wherever you are, you need to be focusing on that. And rather than asking, what is the possibility of spiritual evolution based on my horoscope, the question I enjoy getting asked is, based on my horoscope, how can I more quickly engage my spiritual evolution? I love that question, because it's not coming from a place of fatalism, like, well, if my chart says it's going to work out that way, then great. If it's not, what am I going to do? It's more so, here's where I am, so tell me from my chart, what do I do? What do I work on? Do I focus more on meditation, contemplation? Do I focus more on psychological healing? Do I focus more on surrounding myself with supportive individuals? How can I understand myself better through this astrological chart so that I can make better choices in regards to my spiritual evolution? So these are things to keep in mind. So astrology is good to give you an understanding of what your base potential is, and then from there you build upon it. And that's with any area of life. If you have a certain amount of dexterity for music, well, then you have to build upon that. If you have a certain amount of capacity for business, well, you start there and then you build upon that. It all comes from that idea that talent is overrated. And I know I've talked about this before. There's a book called Talent is Overrated, and it says that those people who are successful, they're not people who are just naturally talented. That helps. They are people who worked at it. They are people who never gave up. They are people who kept trying until they were successful. Because usually people who are naturally talented don't try that hard because it just comes easy to them. So the moment they hit an obstacle or a block, they say, oh, well, gee, I'll just stop there because I'm talented enough. And that happens a lot with spiritual practice. A person gets so far, they hit a block, an obstacle, they don't understand where to go, they don't find the right kind of help, and they stop or they stall at that stage. So astrology, wonderful. Good for guiding yourself. Good for giving you ideas, self-knowledge about this personality, history, mind, body. I don't worry about it so much when it comes to spiritual evolution. I let it only be a guide. So, the person who asked this question, if you ever want to have a session where we talk about what do you need to do, what do you need to make peace with, what do you need to work on, happy to do that. But I don't really want to get into this person's enlightened, this person's not enlightened based on their chart, or you will be enlightened, you won't be. You just got to keep going and doing what you're doing in regards to your own personal spiritual path. Spirituality is like a jungle. You have to find your own way out. If you find some trails along the way from other people who've cut them, you follow them. And then when the trail ends, you start making your own again. But anyway, that's how you get out. I'm trying to remember where I heard that. That's not that's not mine. I heard that somewhere before. It was very good when I heard it. Question number 2. This person mentions that any free time that they have, they're so passionate about reading spiritual books, Yoganandas, Shivanandas, hearing the Bhagavad Gita, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, that this is their satsang, and that the person feels peace and bliss in meditation. But they're unsatisfied because they don't see any blazing light or other sound, such as the Om vibration, that they have read that other great saints have experienced. Well, spiritual growth isn't about blazing lights. It's not about the information that people you've read about have had. Those famous yogis who've had these wonderful experiences, they had these wonderful experiences because they had to in order to get your attention. That's why Autobiography of a Yogi is so overwhelmingly fantastic. That's why when you read a spiritual book about a saint who can levitate or see light, you're just pulled right in because it's amazing. But they had those experiences to get you interested. Spiritual growth is simply about knowing what you are. So it's being at peace with yourself and knowing what you are. Personally, while in meditation, I've had some interesting experiences. Not going to get into them because they were my own personal experiences. Having an experience of when you take a walk, you are so overwhelmed by the fantastic capacity for nature to do what it does. For when you look in the sky, to be in awe of the fact that there is a glowing ball of gas, the sun, which allows us to have life on Earth. These ideas of seeing blazing light and hearing great sounds, they're wonderful inspiration, and a lot of people can have them, but not everybody. And that's one of the things that might be helpful for a person in regards to looking at their astrological chart, because some people are meant to have these profound, idealized things, spiritually speaking. Others are meant to make peace with what they see around them. It's a more Zen-like approach. Astrologically, they'd say this is more of a Vishnu approach, seeing God the divine in everything, not as though it is all glowing and like a cartoon and beautiful, but just being able to appreciate that vast complexity. So everything looks the same as it would to any other individual, but you are so in awe of it. The fact that this can even exist, that's a kind of feeling that you develop the more you meditate and the clearer you get. But it's also something you have to cultivate. You have to think about these things. You have to marvel at the greatness of life. The fact that I'm able to talk to you. The fact that there are, at this moment, 7 to 8 billion people on the earth, all living their lives. It's just amazing to me. So this idea of seeing blazing lights in meditation or the writings of great saints, don't worry about that. That's not your path. Your path is to make peace with yourself. Know what you are, and that's it. From there, it unfolds naturally. So keep that in mind. If you're doing that, and it might mean that you don't meditate so much. It might mean that, okay, well, if I want to be at peace with myself, what do I have to do that? Do I have to make peace with my father, my mother? Do I have to get some education? Do I have to figure out why I have these extreme fears and phobias? Do I have to kick an addiction? I have to figure out, why can't I be in this present moment and experience the all that is always there? So whether you have this amazing spiritual sight or insight or not, you ask yourself, what is preventing me from seeing this? And the universe responds, and you have to act on that. You have to follow that. That is your own personal path. So you use the writings of saints and these fantastic experiences. You see them for what they are. They're not for you to define your own spiritual progress. They're for you to be inspired. And as you grow more spiritually, and I like to think of it as maturing as a human being, the less you are impressed by these things. Just like as you grow up, the less you become impressed by people who are famous, or the less impressed you are by people who have a really nice sports car, or the less impressed you are by, well, anyway, we can go on and on, but you get it. Like, the more you mature, both mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, the less impressed you are by all these things that you compare yourself to, because you're open to the all, the vast complexity and intricacies that are just making this happen in the first place. So this is why the whole idea of be here now, while I do think you need to do some sort of discipline to experience that be here now, and you do need to work on things, but that is kind of like an end result. You know what you are. You be it. It's not comparing to anyone else. The more you compare yourself to others, no matter how great they are, the more trouble you're going to have. So you want to follow what they did, maybe. Did they meditate? Did they eat well? Did they love people? Were they in harmony with their environment? You follow what they did, and then you have your own experience. Okay, so a couple other questions. So when I concentrate on the 7th chakra, there's a great difference in how you feel, this person writes, but they usually fall asleep, and they don't know what happens. So there's peacefulness and bliss, but they fall asleep. Well, that's part of yogic practice too. It's learning to train yourself to stay awake while you meditate. It's training yourself to maintain clarity and not be overwhelmed by a tendency towards sleep or unconsciousness. And that's just something you have to train yourself to do. Make yourself stay awake. Find a way. This is something we will be going over in the Yoga Sutras class, which is coming up here in October. So an 8-week Yoga Sutras class we're going to be doing an online webinar, because in the Yoga Sutras they talk about Yoga Nidra. They talk about sleep, and we're going to explore that. And we did that within the, if you remember, in the Kriya Yoga class that just finished, the Kriya Yoga webinar that just finished, which again is available as that audio download at Asheville Vedic Astrology. We talked about yogic sleep and the importance of it. There's also a video on this site, so please review that. Now, we don't want you to focus on sleeping. We want you to practice staying awake, staying awake as you meditate, and that just comes with practice. And you have to figure out, what do I need to do so I stay awake when I meditate? Do I need to get more rest beforehand? Do I need to eat different foods so I'm not groggy and sleepy? Whatever it is, that's your job to figure out what that is, and it's different for everybody. And the question number 4 just relates to question number 2. A little frustrated with progress, feels that this person feels that they're not expanded into infinite divinity yet. Well, you are. You just aren't aware of it. So again, that comes back to the idea of meditation, and that idea of asking the universe every day, often as you can, asking God, the divine consciousness, how can I realize that I am already part of this infinite divinity? It's that thought, and that's an important part of yoga and meditation that a lot of people don't either talk about or don't get. And that's the idea that we have different bodies we have to mature. We have to mature the physical body. We have to mature the mental body, the emotional body. We have to mature the spiritual body. And as you mature these things, whether it's through physical exercise for the physical body, good food, training the mind to be able to concentrate and be focused, yoga practice, and even just doing exercises that require intelligence in the first place, the mental body, learning to balance your emotional nature, your emotional body. And that sometimes takes counseling, because you have all these weird little attachments, weird little aversions and things that you have to work through. That's not what spiritual practice is for. Spiritual practice is really for someone who's already healthy in this regard. So getting regular counseling, that helps. Pranayama also helps to balance out the emotional body. But again, you have to actually work through these things in your inner consciousness. This is one of the reasons why the idea of technique is overrated, because you can do all the techniques you want, but if you don't have the skills to deal with your consciousness, because consciousness doesn't respond always to technique. Consciousness is fluid. You have to be fluid. You have to learn to communicate with consciousness, your inner consciousness. Just like in order to have a good relationship, it's not the technique of, okay, to have a good relationship, I always buy my wife flowers on Friday, I make sure I wash the car, I tell her I love her every Wednesday. That's like the technique of a relationship. It's automatic, and that's not going to do it. For relationships, you do those things, sure, but it comes more from spontaneity, that capacity to participate in the relationship. So by participating and understanding your consciousness and moving through any kind of fears, phobias, setbacks, obstacles, blocks, depression, anger, anxieties, that's part of it. That's how you balance out this mental, emotional body. And then that prepares you to understand the spiritual body, which makes it more likely that you will be able to appreciate the vastness of the infinity all around you, which you already are. So that's why these first 3 steps, the rest usually happens more easily. It blooms more naturally. You have to provide the proper situations. So this might not be the answer you wanted, but try to not be frustrated, meaning just take a breath and say, this is where I am. All right, where do I need to go now? What do I need to work on? What's getting in the way of myself being at peace with who I am? Work that out. What's getting in the way of my capacity to meditate and stay awake? Work that out. Do one little thing at a time. That adds up over the years. If you do one little thing at a time, 10, 20 years, you've done a lot of things. You don't do any of them because you're so frustrated, nothing ever happens. You come back around next time, no big changes, which is what we want to avoid, because the quicker you wake up, then you're free. You can be here, you can not be here. You don't mind because you know what's going on. Okay, so a couple other questions. We keep going here. When does one use the tongue in the practices? So there's a couple possible ways I can interpret that. A particular technique which I've already talked about in these videos, so go back where I talk about, I think it's the video with Kichari Mudra in it. The idea that you need to stick your tongue up behind your nasal cavity. A little extreme. I figure if we were meant to do that for yoga, our bodies would allow us to do that without doing anything drastic. But again, this is a debate that gets me in a lot of trouble because people like to argue with me about it. So I don't want to go into that. If you want to do that, fine. No big deal. You think it's what you need, great. But maybe you're talking about when I mentioned in the class just touching the tongue to the roof of the mouth or slightly back behind the hard palate, which I've also mentioned in two videos previous to this one. So you can do that at any time. I usually do alternate nostril breathing first, as you know, when we practice together. And then when I do the Kriya pranayama, Jyoti mudra, I'll stick my tongue just to the palate, the roof of my mouth, and hold it there. It's enough of a connection for me. So you can do that anytime. And you don't always have to do it. I don't do it every time. But most of the time I do. It's a natural thing that occurs. So will these 4 techniques be sufficient to attain self-realization? All right, well, that's a good question. And I know that the questioner participated in the class. And I think I only went over 3 techniques, specifically to the Kriya process. Now, of course, we did alternate nostril breathing and the Om meditation technique. And in my mind, the answer is yes. I know the higher techniques. I practice them from time to time. In the next book that I'm writing, I talk about them. I give instructions for them. But personally, as I've said before, the more complicated your techniques have to be, the less advanced it really is, spiritually speaking. Because really, what you're aiming to do is to calm your consciousness, still your consciousness, and direct it towards God. Absorb yourself in that divine infinite consciousness. If it takes a lot of techniques, if you have to chant complicated mantras, if you have to put yourself in funny hatha yoga positions, if you have to stick your tongue up your nose like some people think, if you ever really stop and think about all the weird things that humanity says you have to do to be spiritual or enlightened, just study some religions. Study the world's religions, and you'll read some weird stuff. And it's easy to think that because we're practicing yoga that we're exempt from that. But no, we're not. There are other paths and other religions that are just as valid as the yoga path. And if they look at what the things we talk about, it's kind of funny, I think. So if you step out of it a little bit, there are some strange things we think we have to do to be awake. But if you think you have to do them and you do them, they help. So that's great. Our consciousness is a reflection of our beliefs and so on. So if you don't think these techniques are sufficient, they're not going to be. If you think that you need the next advanced key, well, go find it. But I don't think it's going to make any difference because you have that consciousness of, I need the next thing, if you follow what I'm getting at here. It's a habit. But if you can use what you've got and accept those tools, you could do a lot with a wrench, a hammer, a knife, a saw and some nails. You can do a lot with that. You don't need a crane. But anyway, will these 4 techniques be sufficient to attain self-realization? My emphatic answer is yes. But you have to ask yourself, what kind of consciousness do you have? Do you have the I need a bigger, better mentality consciousness? Always? Because that's going to always happen, whether it's a new job, new car, new person, new spiritual technique. Then you're never going to get anywhere. You will, but it'd be better if you just made peace with one thing, with one set of techniques. So my answer is yes. Now, if you get bored, well, sure, go find another technique to keep you involved. But again, remember, as we talked about in the Kriya class, that these techniques, there's a mechanism behind each one of them, and it's the same mechanism. So whether you're doing Jyoti Mudra, whether you're doing Kriya Pranayama, whether you're doing some of the advanced Kriyas, well, the mechanism is still the same. Usually, I use the advanced Kriya Pranayama as the one beyond initiation when I'm sitting for 2 to 3 hours and I just want to do something different. So, but they have the same effect and they're great. They work wonderfully. No complaints. Now, next question. We got a few more minutes left here. Can one do 108 more Kriyas or not? And this is also something I went over in the class. I'm pretty sure you took the class. I'll have to double check this. But anyway, go back and re-listen to the recordings on that particular thing. I'm not going to go too much into that. Sure, you can do 100, 108 or more, but you need to follow the procedure that we went through. So you start with 12 to 14, and you build up in increments of 12 over 6 months to a year to 2 years and so on. So go back and review the class recordings. And also, if you don't have those, which you should, go back and listen to the videos on the Kriya Pranayama on this particular channel, because I talk about that there. Okay, so the next question, final question, always a good one, another one that seems to get me in hot water whenever I talk about it, but that's all right, someone needs to say it. When you say not to follow a guru, is it only because of the risk of taking on their personality quirks, or are there other reasons? I thought about how to answer this question again. And it's not that I don't think you shouldn't follow a guru, it's that I don't think you should deify a guru or any person. Your path is directly between you, your higher self, divine consciousness, God, however you think of it. To deify any embodied person, place, or thing is only a form of entertainment that's going to stall you out. And again, this is a difficult thing to state because, well, most yogic cultures are all about deifying the guru. But then again, I also think that's why we have not so many enlightened people in the world, as there should be, based on all the people practicing yoga and meditation. So as far as the guru goes, if you have a teacher, someone who shares techniques, someone who inspires you, someone who, when you talk to them, they clear your doubts, they give you good advice, listen to them. But it's just like any other teacher. In order to follow someone correctly, it's not about connecting with them in meditation or hoping that their spiritual grace will come your way. It's about doing what they did. If you're not doing what they're doing, if they're not encouraging you to be like them, if they're encouraging you to, deify them, worship them, or see them as whatever more than just a person, because that's all they are, is a person, just like you're a person, and you have that same exact light of God within you as they do, if they're requiring specific connections, if they're requiring specific pledges, if they are grasping or clinging, and that can be very subtle, that's what you have to be aware of, and that's what's difficult about it, then no, don't follow a guru. Use techniques, study books, connect with God, the divine consciousness, become at peace with yourself in any which way that requires. And that can come through a child, it's cliche. A child can say something to you which can inspire you. A person on the street. And I go over this again in many of my other videos. So it's not that I don't think you shouldn't learn from anyone. That's a very good thing. Learning from someone who's skillful and successful, that should be true in any field. But as far as, taking the place of a father figure, mother figure, and engendering cleanliness and devotion, and that you have to connect with them in order to be successful in this path, you can do that if you want, but I think that's just going to delay, I know, that's just going to delay your capacity to know the truth of what's going on. Because we're all the same thing. No one's better or worse than anyone else. Everyone has their quirks, everyone has their little personality things, but we like to ignore it because we like to ignore the fact that reality can be messy at times. So that's all. Just don't worry too much about a guru. Learn from someone who's helpful, and then be at peace with that and be at peace with yourself.